push.
Amy? Amy? Amy?
There we go.
Lisa? Somebody.
All right, good evening, and that was some echo there. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Roll call, please. Whoever's doing that. Who's doing that?
That would be me.
You want me to, I can go down the parks roll real quick. All right, we have Roberta Larson here, Elizabeth Ryan, Adam DeGonia. No. Ken Carnes. No. Katie Stokes. No. Carol Civils. There we go. Kath Stanley. There we go. Valerie Swearingen. David Taylor. Not here. All right. Oh, there you got the rest of them. We're good? Okay, on council, we'll just go around here. Councilmember Fitzgerald. Councilmember Graves. Councilmember Roberts. There we go. Councilmember Palumbi. Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Toll.
Here.
Toll, I saw something. There we go. Councilmember Saper. Saper's a no. Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
And did I miss somebody? Did I miss anybody on either side here? I did not. Okay. Then there you go. Oh, it says you're going to introduce each other. I guess I ruined that. I just did a roll call. We'll call it good. Okay. Review of community feedback for Community Forest Park is number 3, just Lance. Please.
All right, everybody hear me okay? Hello, this is Lance Klein again. This is our kind of second special meeting regarding River Forest Park. I'd like to thank you all again for participating in this evening's meeting. I'm going to remain masked to protect you all as I had COVID last week, so and I'll do my best to keep my voice and not clear my throat too much. So, and then I also have my colleague here.
I'm Will Metcalf, working with Lance in our Kansas City studio at SWT Design.
We hope to kind of move through this presentation in about 30 minutes. And in terms of the topics we want to address in the agenda today, kind of briefly touch on where we are in the overall process and schedule, review the community feedback we received in June regarding the concepts that we shared in the meeting we had with you last time, as well as touch base briefly on the feedback we got in the first open house. A brief kind of recap on the existing conditions of the site, then touch on what we hope to be the meeting outcomes today and really the purpose of today's meeting. Then review that final concept design, and then kind of review some of the potential funding sources, the costs associated with the project, and some high-level considerations for operation and maintenance for the park. And then ultimately kind of designing everybody that, some of the guiding principles that were established once we got the initial community feedback is really creating a park that builds community, invites gathering, and really embraces the nature of this site and promotes new experiences within the North Kansas City Park system. So we're in the final phase of the feasibility study for River Forest, and really targeting an open house to share the final concept design in mid-September on September 14th. But before that meeting, we want to share with you share that final design with you, the costs associated with it, and make sure there's not any adjustments to make to that before we present that to the community in September. So, I think throughout this project, we've been really pleased with the amount of community feedback and participation we've got in both open houses. And then following those open houses, we provided online surveys, basically replicating the same questions and feedback opportunities provided at those open houses. So I know you guys all have this packet and you kind of follow along with it. But we're kind of looking at the results of, a focus of that second open house was to really gauge from the community of those three concepts, was there a favorite? Unfortunately, we got a clear favorite in terms of concept 2. And another critical part of that kind of second open house and community engagement was to prioritize with the community what parts and features of the park improvements were most important to them. And so you can see in the kind of bottom right there with that bar graph, trails and playground were sort of the top 2 elements. Ecological, environmental opportunities was a third. And then following that, we had some votes for shelters and seating, opportunities for environmental education, as well as a few others and public art. So this was a slide we shared in the first meeting. So we're, to a certain degree, kind of reminding everybody of some of the priorities that we heard out of that first open house. And I think in general, kind of summarizing that, people really recognized and appreciated the unique natural features that this park provides, and really wanted to highlight that compared to Mackin and Dag Park. And they wanted to, protect those natural features, provide opportunities for trails and walking within the park for all ages and abilities, and look at play opportunities that maybe embrace that natural setting as well. And I think, the concerns we heard, obviously safety and security, preserving that natural habitat, addressing some of the erosion on the site, and then, coming up and providing a design that doesn't create conflicts with noise and adjacent neighbors. And I think one thing we really want to emphasize here too is that when we consider that concern, with conflicts with the play and adjacent neighbors, it went beyond noise to include parking. From our perspective, we don't really see a scenario where there's a park without a parking lot. Otherwise, we're going to have issues with those adjacent neighbors and people parking into the street, and sort of being good neighbors and good designers. We recognize that even if neighbors can walk to the park, not everybody's going to do that all the time. Even though this is a neighborhood park, it is open to people throughout the community and beyond, and those people are likely to drive to the park versus walk or bike. A sort of brief recap of the existing conditions. Moving on to the next page and slide. Obviously, we've got the existing waterfall, which has become a little bit famous through this process, if you weren't familiar with it. There is a stream running through the park, and with that, there's a floodplain associated with it. Within that lower area, there's a lot of woodland, but a lot of that is full with kind of invasive honeysuckle, which chokes out that natural vegetation and also really deters the visibility in that lower area. That upper terrace, closer to Vernon and 26th, is relatively flat. There's the existing access road off of Vernon, as well as pedestrian access off of 26th Street. So in terms of what we want the purpose of today's meeting and focus to be is really to confirm that the park design that we are going to present to you aligns with those community priorities that we heard in the last open house. We want to review some of the potential outside funding sources, knowing that this park project is not yet on the city budget. We want to determine if there is a preference for just building a portion of this design or the full design. And if it is the full design, is that phased? We want to touch on some of the considerations for operation and maintenance for this new park. Ultimately, really confirming the park design and potential phasing before that gets presented in the open house. And just a reminder, this is a feasibility study or a master plan for the park. There'd be a subsequent phase that would, do all the construction documents and specifications and really provide the drawings needed to construct the project in the next step.
All right. And then I was just going to add, anytime anyone has anything, please just go ahead and throw your hand up. I'll call on council members and she'll call on Parks Board members. So.
Okay, keep an eye out for me if you can.
There we go, yeah, and I forgot to start with the reminder, just make sure the red light's on your microphone before you speak so everyone at home can hear you as well. There you go.
Thank you, Mayor. So with this slide, before we kind of jump into the designs, we want to kind of share how we summarize the community feedback we've gotten into the different park features. And also, we also wanted to identify how these different park elements address multiple benefits. So, while the trail provides those opportunities for walking and fitness, it also provides opportunity for access to nature, as well as access to the nature playscape. And, with the construction of that trail in certain areas, it addresses concern just as a first example. So, I'm going to save my voice a little bit and hand it over to Will to kind of finish up this slide. He'll walk through the final design, and then after that, he'll turn it back over to me. I'll talk about some of those funding sources, the costs that we're projecting for the project, kind of ranked based on priorities, touch on those considerations for operation and maintenance, and then answer any questions that come up after that. So.
All right, thanks, Lance. Everyone hear me okay? Didn't quite get close enough the first time. All right, great. So the second item there, the nature playscape and playground in the lower portion. So we'll go into more detail about that later, but again, that's providing a variety of benefits in a way that is blended in with the character of River Forest Park and its topography. So providing that interaction with nature in a way that just distinctly expresses, again, that character of River Forest that is so endearing to everybody and that we've heard a lot of stories about. And we've positioned that in a way that addresses those concerns about activity and noise. In the upper portion in particular, that looks like a natural place for a playground, but those adjacent neighbors in particular were concerned that that would disrupt that view into the park and some of the tranquility that they experience with that. Removal of invasive species and replacing that with native plant communities. So going back to the survey result, ecological restoration or ecological measures were number 3 from the community in terms of priority. And those measures really underscore all of the benefits that this park could provide in terms of being able to restore habitat, promote interaction with nature. When you walk the site now, it's pretty much infested with honeysuckle, which will choke out that bottom layer, prevents recruitment of trees, and can actually prevent the kind of replenishment of the woodland over decades. It's not an imminent issue, but it is something that over time can really degrade the quality of the, let's say, nature down in that lower portion of the park. And that also does double duty when you're clearing out that mid-layer, that honeysuckle. It's remarkable how much more visible that mid-level is. You can see through the woodlands, through the park, and that's something that can improve both the perceived and actual safety of being down there in that lower portion if you're enjoying the trail or other aspects of the park. We're providing small shelters and seating areas just to provide rest that facilitates use from wider age groups, for example, different abilities, provides something else to do in the park, to have a picnic. And again, we've placed those in a way that we're trying to address that activity concern. And then capturing, slowing runoff from any new impervious surface. So while we've had a lot of discussions about the parking lot, just making sure that we're being responsible in terms of if there's any new runoff from those surfaces, that we're capturing that. We're using that as an opportunity to also provide more habitat, more planting, more vegetation, things that will improve the aesthetic, the feel of the park as well. Again, achieving multiple benefits, and it can also help those erosion concerns. Establishing a pollinator meadow in the upper portion. So people really valued wildlife, biodiversity. I remember one woman showing up to the first open house with a book on planting wild plant communities. I think there's a really strong desire to see more of that, I think, both broadly, but also in this community. That provides habitat for all sorts of wildlife that, again, would just really improve or build upon the character of the park. And address concerns. You know, there are lots of concerns about existing trees and nature. We're looking to restore that in every instance that we can, and also protect what's there. And then providing interpretive signage for natural features. That's just another layer that helps people learn more about the park, appreciate it more, and foster that sense of stewardship. So walking through the overall plan, concept 2 was the very strongly preferred alternative. And so wanted to walk you through to refresh it, but also to highlight some of the refinements that we've made. We've worked with city staff and really dug into the feedback to determine what those adjustments should be. And so as we kind of walk through, the upper portion has that accessible walking loop, the parking, and a couple shelters, and we'll look at this area in more detail in a moment. Circling around that open lawn, there's an access to an overlook that then provides a sight line down to the playground. It could also incorporate netting and other play features. The nature trail going, descending down toward the play area, that is an opportunity to address the erosion at the pipe and outfall there. That's right now pretty clogged up, so as part of the measure of putting this trail in here, we would address that issue. And so one thing that we've done as you descend there, we've maintained the hillslide and the zip line, but we've incorporated the playground from concept 3. And one of the most common open-ended suggestions that we got from the community was, why not put the playground from number 3 into concept 2? Concept 3 on its own, that play experience did get a fair number of votes, but you know, when we think about the opportunity to really blend in play moments with the site and have that all lead up to a dedicated playground, the community expressed a pretty strong desire to have that dedicated play space instead of just these little play moments. So that feeds into the trail loop. So this concept features 2 loops in the lower portion. The eastern loop comes around. There might be some moments where some boardwalk is needed for accessibility. That loops around, and you can continue on to the interpretive center at the Waterfall. And then the western loop is a little bit larger. So all combined, it's about 3/4 of a mile of trail with various interpretive opportunities. And then the other change we made, instead of the stepping stones across the creek, we swapped that out for a permatrack boardwalk, which would promote accessibility. So access is another big goal for this project, making sure as wide a group as possible can enjoy all of the benefits that the trail system can provide. And so just walking through those benefits, I wanted to sorry about that. So I think for very good reason. The trail system was the number one prioritized element from the community. In the beginning, we heard a lot about the playground, and that thread is still very strong. But in this recent open house, in terms of a priority, it was the trails that actually emerged as number one. It was slight, but that's how it shook out. So it's a really suitable and low-impact development for that floodplain area, and it provides a ton of benefit despite it being low impact. So a few of those benefits, the connectivity throughout the park will increase the overall activity and use, which will, again, improve the perceived and actual safety. When you put trails and playgrounds and some other features together, they really multiply on each other, and the trails are an opportunity to promote health and wellness for all ages, for a wider group of people. So if you're not a family or you're not a kid coming to the park, walking the trail or incorporating in your jogging loop is something that a wider age group can do. And that facilitates that hands-on experience with nature throughout the park. It's what takes you to those interpretive stations. It's what keeps people kind of on the path to protect that lower area, especially as it's being restored. And it can foster that sense of stewardship. And then it builds upon, again, the natural setting of River Forest Park to really provide that unique feature. It's something that North Kansas City doesn't have, this idea of a nature trail. So I think that's why it really resonated with the community. So zooming in on the upper portion, just to provide a little bit more detail on that. Coming from the bottom right in the entry, we'll kind of work our way to the top left here quickly. So the parking has been arranged such that we're avoiding tearing down as many existing trees as possible. There is a stump that would have to come out with that, but we did really hear that concern, and we share that value as well, that we should preserve as many of the existing trees as possible. So this alignment really achieves that. It provides 8 parking spaces, and as I mentioned earlier, the adjacent rain garden and swale would collect the runoff from that to reduce the impact of that increased amount of impervious surface. We've got a hub there, that's number 8. So that would be kind of a welcome point into the site. It could be signage that has a little bit of a trail map. It could have some bike racks, a little bench, perhaps a water fountain. It's just a way for folks to be welcomed in the site, to get oriented, and it's the launching point. And then adjacent to that, we'll talk about phasing in a minute, but there's a combined restroom shelter there that's a little bit larger. Continuing on, again, the loop circles the open lawn with a smaller shelter that could seat a family. And then you have the overlook access that looks down below. So as you continue on, there's another kind of point of entry off 26th Avenue. So we wanted to make sure that if that's your entry point, there was signage, orientation, perhaps another 1 or 2 bike racks there, just in case that's where you're coming into the park, because we do see that as an alternative entry. If you're avoiding the upper loop for whatever reason, you just want to get down below, you can have that more direct access from there. And I mentioned, I want to reiterate the opportunity with the descending nature trail to repair the erosion issue with that pipe and outfall. And then that leads you through the play area, so just providing a little more thought on what we're conceiving that to be, this nature playscape. We've got a few elements defined, such as inclusive swings. Swings are always popular. We want to make sure that that's open to a wide group of users. We've got log steppers, which is more of a balance activity, so those are less standardized. It's a little bit hybrid depending on your age. You can climb, you can crawl, you can do a little bit of jumping. So it's a really fun play opportunity. And then there's also a tower element with a smaller slide. So that would complement the hill slide. Depending on phasing, maybe one or the other isn't there. So for a while, so we just wanted to provide a few different opportunities there. And then we've also got the zip line option. And the trail continues on to the Waterfall Interpretive Station. And actually, sorry, that's what I wanted to end on with that. And so I wanted to talk a little bit, about the benefits of having a more expanded nature playscape. So,
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify earlier. I think I misunderstood or misheard you. So the loop that goes around the lawn, I thought you said earlier it was like the most accessible path, like the most, right, like hard surface. But getting down to the playground, it's still accessible, right? Strollers, wheelchairs, wagons
Yeah.
can still get to that point,
yeah,
right?
we've been thinking of that as more as a nature path, so it might be a different material. That's not something that we've necessarily decided at this point. That decision could come a little bit later. As you go further into the loop, it could have a little bit different dimension and character, so we just wanted to denote that difference
Okay.
between
Well, I
the two.
thought so with the inclusive swings. I love that added in there. I just want to make sure we can get there safely. Thank
Yeah,
you.
the pathway from that loop down to that playground would be paved and accessible for all those different modes you mentioned there.
So open-ended play really encourages the development of imagination, decision-making, motor skills, confidence, in a way that really standardized playground equipment doesn't. So that's a lot of the driver of this playscape, is to provide those opportunities that we think really aligns, again, with the character of the woodland and being a little more adventurous. Features such as the zip line could increase use by up to 18%. So there's a forthcoming study that basically just says when you have high-speed elements like that, they really are a measurable draw to the park. And when you're thinking about doing a zip through, kind of a more wooded or forest environment, it would just be a really fun way for kids to be able to transverse the topography a little bit. Again, not talking about a massive zip line with some kind of waiver. It would only be a couple of feet off the ground. There would be a platform, and it would have safety surfacing below, but it's still a little bit quicker, a little bit different than a slide might be, and again, just really fun and really popular. We're looking at wood equipment. Nowadays, wood equipment is very durable with the same kind of lifespan you would find on metal playground equipment, but it also provides a more multisensory experience. So this play equipment would have the wood, it would have some metal, some plastic, some rope. A lot of different materials are really stimulating for kids. So providing that variety is just an extra layer to the play experience that more closely matches River Forest Park. And again, I wanted to express that it's conceptualized to be a real expression of River Forest Park. The play elements are blending into the topography. They're introducing kids to this woodland community, giving different views of it as they played, giving them different ways to slide down or zip through or run through, and practice all different kinds of movement as they experience the unique environment. And then finally, just a little bit more on that upper section, just to provide a little more clarity. So with the parking lot and the shelter, we would look to be screening that with a combination of vegetation, perhaps some fencing. Really, the goal there is not to establish a huge barrier. It's to reduce the visual impact of elements such as the parking lot. So the pollinator meadow being a couple feet tall or taller than just normal lawn would screen some of that paving, and trees could attenuate a little bit of noise from the shelter, just help it feel more quiet, in addition to just reducing the visual impact of those elements, keeping the adjacent neighbors in mind. And then the section below is just taking a slice through that winding nature trail to show that sequence where something I didn't mention earlier, still thinking about that potential connection up to 28th as an option. That is not a requirement, but then you could slide down from one section of the trail to the other. and then progress on to either the hillslide or that nature playscape once you get to the bottom area.
All right, thanks, Will. Sort of moving on from the discussion on design, I'm going to get into the cost in the next slide, but before we kind of dove into the costs on the project, knowing this isn't on the city's budget, we wanted to identify a couple potential funding sources that the city's going to look at to construct this park, assuming everybody wants to move forward with it. A few things about that first grant. It's a community revitalization grant, kind of through the American Recovery Act. It's managed by the state of Missouri, and fortunately, River Forest Park meets several of the criteria for that grant. Most notably, development of park and green space in a lower moderate income area. The amount of money provided in the whole sum for the metro area is $20 million. And we understand they're looking for opportunities beyond Kansas City, Missouri, where a lot of those dollars have gone in the past. So that's good news for North Kansas City. I think another advantage with this project is the feasibility study that this has done. I believe will provide a competitive advantage over a lot of other submittals. A lot of projects haven't been designed, they're just an idea. They haven't been priced out. They haven't gone through community engagement and process. So I think, fortunately, this is aligning schedule-wise with that. There's no cap on the grant request. Obviously, we're not going to ask for the $20 million. We don't need that. But we're not limited by any dollar amount, so the project could be fully funded. And actually, the cycle of this works really well with kind of applications wrapping up in October. Things would be awarded in 2022, and I believe dollars would be available the next year. Kim, is there anything else you'd want to add to that first grant?
No, I checked before this meeting, and the application period hasn't opened yet. It was supposed to open sometime in August, so it's currently August. But this is a grant that I would love to be able to pursue.
Okay, thank you. The second funding opportunity is the Land and Water Conservation Fund. That's another state of Missouri Department of Conservation funded project. And that's really focused on improving the environment and access to nature and parks. Also aligns really nicely with this project. And I think, if you're not aware, the site was funded, I think, in the 80s with the same Land and Water Conservation Fund. And in our experience, they like to kind of reinvest and see progression on those initial investments. So there may be one drawback to this one is it has that $50,000 or $500,000 max. One quick slide before we do the big reveal on costs. We have really tried to rank all the different project costs based on the community feedback we've gotten. We've also included all the necessary infrastructure to complete these different elements in the park. So, the pricing we're showing is not just for play equipment and surfacing, and it includes all the kind of pieces and parts necessary to do that. We're taking constructability and the potential of phasing into consideration. Unfortunately, and fortunately, the ranking sort of works pretty well with the park design if things were to be phased. And really, these prices are inclusive of everything. So that would include, we've got a little bit of contingency, which is a kind of buffer of percentage that we assign at this planning level on a project. It would include the design fees in the next phase, all kind of general conditions, mobilization, all the what we would call soft costs that maybe don't always get accounted for when you're thinking about project costs. So more or less really trying to give you the full picture of costs. So with that, we've got, the playground and upper loop trail as what we think would be that kind of priority based on the feedback we got from the community. So that $392,000 for the playground not only includes those play equipment elements we showed, includes all the safety surfacing beneath that, and that is a poured in place or artificial turf system, not engineered wood fiber or something that's going to take a lot of maintenance. All the grading necessary to kind of blend in that pathway and create those play terraces. We're including that sort of path from the walking loop through the play over to the waterfall, just a little bit to the left of the page here. Some small signage by the waterfall, and the simple kind of site furnishings in terms of benches and trash receptacles you'd like to have around a playground. And this also includes a water fountain and then the necessary utility infrastructure for that. We've got the same icons that we've had on these similar slides, trying to show those multiple benefits with each of these elements. So it's not just a playground, it sort of gets you in nature. It provides a walking path that would extend to those other nature trails. Positioning it on that slope, as Will mentioned, helps mitigate some of those noise concerns, as well as those erosion issues there. The next item we have would be that upper loop trail, plus the sidewalk connection over to Vernon, the entry signage and kind of trailhead associated with that, that kind of multi-purpose lawn within that loop for playing frisbee or running around. We've included a second water fountain along that upper loop trail and the water service for that. We have that small family scale pavilion, and then the pollinator meadow surrounding the parking lot, as well as new shade trees adjacent to that parking lot. The other category we've called kind of the necessary infrastructure to go with those elements. So that includes all the grading and erosion control you would need to do with that for the play and that upper loop trail. We've talked about addressing that pipe outfall that's underneath the playground. And then, we're putting that parking lot in that necessary infrastructure. While we don't like to spend money on parking, we do think it is necessary for this project. And so that includes the cost of that parking lot. We have some area lighting there and even some costs associated with security cameras, if that was of interest, and the screen fence to kind of buffer that parking lot from the immediate neighbors, the rain garden to manage the runoff from that parking lot, and that's really necessary from the levee district's standpoint to have zero runoff from this site. And then, with the play and some of these other improvements, there will be some very limited tree removal, and we'll reuse those logs if possible for features around the park and seating. The asterisks we have by the pollinator meadow and rain garden are to point out that cost is not just the installation and the cost of those plant materials. It includes 3 years of maintenance by the landscape contractor to really do the heavy, intensive establishment for those environments. That's when most of the weeding and treatment really needs to occur. So that's not sort of a burden on park staff to do those things. So any questions about these priority elements before we look at the costs of the other items? So we've kind of I think
Hello, I have a question. Do you oversee, who oversees the construction of this park?
your contracted design professional would do that.
Where
Love it to
do, are
be
they,
us.
where do we get them?
There would be, I would assume, another RFQ process similar to this project, really inviting different design firms to submit for the next phase of this. And the costs we have associated with this cover the kind of typical percentage of those
So
professional
you have just
services.
designed the park, and then we have to find somebody to build it?
There is, with projects, there's the kind of master plan phase where we sort of map and lay everything out and get enough information to price out. And then there's kind of a subsequent phase to that where there's construction documents, detailed drawings, laying out everything, as well as specifications, and then the bid process that design professionals manage to construct it. It's really how I think probably every project's done through the city, and I don't know, Kim, if you want to elaborate on that.
We would probably follow a similar process to the design and construction of Diamond Number One. So, and that is typically how the city
So we're
does.
not done with this yet.
It's a journey.
I get to sit up here again.
We'll do it again. Councilmember Smith.
As far as the numbers go, how good do we feel about these? As you know, is this going to be the number we see from a bid, or do you think it could go higher?
We have tried to provide unit pricing based on the increases we've seen in the last 2 years. So
Okay.
I can't guarantee you these won't go up, but we have seen things plateau.
Okay.
So I feel pretty confident in these prices.
Okay, I think we're all a little shell shocked from previous estimates versus bids.
Right.
Diamond One being a prime example of that. The other part, and I might have missed on the priorities from the community, but priority park elements, I see that the restroom is put into phase 2 potentially, which leaves the entirety of the park with no restroom facility at this time. Is there any, temporary or low-cost option for now, speaking as a parent of small children who, when they gotta go, they gotta go?
Yeah.
Anything that we can do in the interim?
And, we're not necessarily dictating to you guys that it doesn't have to be part of the first phase, just based on the cost of it. If it was a concern, that's why we kind of shifted off of there. What we've done in other parks is, the other option is not great, but it's the porta potty. And so, we would provide a pad for that, locate it next to the parking lot for sort of ease of removal to try and keep that clean. But that's really the only other option.
Sure. And one other follow-up to the restroom piece. Is there, I understand like the shelter wanting to be near the parking lot, but as far as the restrooms, was there any discussion of putting them nearer to the playground rather than up front by the parking lot?
That could be an option. That will further increase costs, I would say, because we're running utilities and all those services over to there.
I imagine there's a sewer at the end of 26th that we
There-
could tie into there. I don't know how far it is. You've probably looked at that, but
there is over there as well.
Another consideration was the maintenance. So one of the things that this project really tried to focus on was not only the capital, but ongoing.
Yep.
So how a person would maintain those restrooms, so it being closer to the parking lot helps with that.
gotcha. Is there like an access off of, I know that public access off of into 26 isn't a thing, but could somebody, if they were maintaining, like come down 26 and enter the park with a side-by-side or a four-by-four?
Yeah, I think that's currently what's done now.
Yeah, you could, again, we were trying to keep any perception of access off of that 26. We were really trying to not only train an audience, but our staff as well, that
Gotcha.
they would access everything off of the new main line, which would be off of that street, and avoid driving down or disturbing any of the neighbors on 26. So as a parent of young kids, I feel you.
Yeah, that's a debate we often hear in parks. So, any other questions or?
Councilmember Graves.
I just wanted to make a point regarding the restroom. This park is a fraction of the size of Parkville Nature Sanctuary, and they have no restroom there. There's a porta potty, and it works out just fine. And if you look at the budget, you know, the restroom works out to what, about a quarter of the cost of the total park. So
Yep.
to me, that if you're going to cut something and look at cutting costs, that seems like the most logical place to go. In fact, is just not doing a restroom there. And I think most of the users will live close enough to the park that you can run home real quick if your kid has to use the restroom. That's my point.
I guess okay.
The only thing I would add to that is that the Parkville Nature Center doesn't have all the playground equipment that we're proposing that we put here. So I just think that kind of changes your expectation when you go, but I completely understand, and there are alternatives like we had discussed with the porta potties and such. But I think with all the playground equipment, most people would expect there to be a restroom.
I think Councilmember Palumbi lives nearby. We'll just all go to her house.
Yeah, I guess taking a step back in terms of the question about alternatives for restroom, one alternative besides porta potty is kind of a dry restroom like you might see in a state park. If you've used those before, they're not that much better than a porta potty, but you know, they don't come with the cost of water line, sewer line, and potentially even power. But that would definitely be something to discuss more before that
All right.
decision was made.
But before we continue back and forth on, we do have some discussion questions. We'll hit on all these again. If we want to keep going, we can now and start answering these questions or let them finish, because you're almost done, right?
Yeah, I've
And then
got
we're gonna
a
hit.
couple more slides.
Okay, yeah, I mean, if you do that or just hold.
No, I just had
Okay.
a follow-up about the
Okay.
restroom. How do you maintain those, the dry restroom that you just mentioned? Because if we have a restroom with water flowing to it too, that creates a whole maintenance. You have to maintain plumbing and clean
Just
it.
to be winterized,
Yeah.
yeah. They get pumped out like a porta potty would, with a kind of septic tank type of system, so.
Sounds fun.
I'll go ahead and move through these last couple
Yeah.
slides, and then we can have some further discussion. We've kind of moved the overlook that is adjacent that upper trail out as a separate line item, in case that's not a priority. The next is we prioritize that upper trail, trying to kind of find a balance. We've moved the lower nature trails into a kind of different line item. That includes both that loop west of the stream as well as east, that low water crossing to get you across the stream, as well as some limited boardwalks and educational signage. Within those lower areas, we've included some costs for forest restoration, so that would include over a period of probably 4 years, removing those invasive honeysuckles and then keeping treatment on that over that period, and then providing some seeding in those areas to provide that kind of native vegetation to come back in. And then the kind of final item there is the access path to the north, up to the neighborhoods to the north. I think a few considerations on phasing to think about is with each project, you're going to have at least a 8% mobilization that the contractor is going to charge with that. So, on $1 million project, that's $80,000. That's something to consider. Every year you wait, we typically say a 3% escalation in costs each year. Since 2020, we've almost seen about a 20% increase, and the unit prices we have here are reflecting that. There's always some sort of lost efficiencies in a multi-phase approach, but I think with this design, that's fairly seamless. There is also the kind of consideration of restoring anything during that construction process. If you're having to take out a sidewalk or something like that to gain access, there'll be some additional costs with that. And then there's always that consideration of, you've got construction while you have an active park, and conflicts with that. The kind of last slide before we open it up to discussion, we just want to kind of touch on some of the high-level operation and maintenance considerations for the park, knowing that's a factor in your decision-making process. On the left, we've got your typical tasks that you're doing in your other parks in terms of, if there is a restroom, cleaning that, having to winterize it along with your water fountains, the kind of other typical things listed there. With the life cycle, I think the biggest takeaway out of there is, even though we're proposing that wood playground equipment, that does have a 25-year warranty, which really aligns with more traditional metal playground structures. And I think most of the focus of this slide is to kind of point out some of the new tasks and maybe what might be concerns. So, obviously you guys don't have a zip line now. As Will mentioned, this isn't a destination zip line where you sign a waiver. It's really a piece of playground and equipment that functions as a zip line.
I'm sorry, the 25-year guarantee on that, is that with annual upkeep of some sort for the wood? Are you obligated to do X in order to claim?
No.
No? Okay.
Yeah, no treatment needed on it. So really they're picking hard woods that do really well in that environment instead of the traditional redwood cedar you might have seen in playgrounds you and I played on back in the day. So, and then, with the zip line, with all playground equipment, we recommend a monthly inspection. That can be done by park staff with a little bit of orientation. The zip line, as with all playground equipment, has some replacement parts. The most frequent on the zip line is the seat itself, the sort of roller carriage that rides on the cable. And then there's bumpers where that carriage bumps up at the end and the beginning. Fortunately, the cost of those replacement parts are relatively low at that $500 to $700, and it's covered under that kind of two-year warranty period. I mentioned that the costs of the rain garden and meadow that we're showing includes, that initial establishment period of 3 years and the kind of heavy weeding associated with that. So that isn't really, going to be a burden on park staff in that establishment period. And then, the other kind of new item you guys don't currently have in your parks would be a nature trail. And trail builders are really good at working with drainage and the natural kind of topography. Since this isn't a floodplain, some of those secondary channels from that creek may shift over years, and there may be a little bit of repair associated with that, but that's usually a kind of shovel and pickaxe, just moving some dirt around. So could be done by park staff or even volunteers. And then, with that lower water crossing and kind of ADA walk down to there, when water rises and covers that, often there'll be some sediment in there, and that would need to be just power washed off after those events. So with that, kind of open it up to additional questions and discussion. These are the kind of 4 critical questions we're asking. We'd like to get some consensus on from the group. So I guess maybe starting up top, do you feel like the design we have is aligning with the priorities we heard from the community?
Did you? Oh, I thought you were here. Okay. 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 We will not mark you as walking off. Have a good evening. All right. Further comments?
Katie.
Red button.
There we go.
Well, we're in and out. As a member of the area of that community. I think that this is spot on. We love it. As I've talked to neighbors and as my children have talked about and seen pictures that have come in the house, like, I think you took all the elements of what we've really dreamt of and nailed it. So thank you.
There we go. That sounds like a fairly accurate description here. Anyone else on question 1 here? Okay. There we go. I think we're good there. The next one, would you anticipate, oh, did you have further?
No.
There we go. Would you anticipate implementing this project in phases? And if so, what would you want to see in phase 1 versus phase 2?
Valerie?
I like the idea of phases, but if we can get grants that would possibly do all of the installation at one time, that seems like the best thing. My only concern is operating costs. We haven't talked about that piece. So that, as a Parks Board member, makes me a little nervous.
Councilmember Smith.
Also, I would like to build it in a single phase because if we wait, 10% on $1 million on the second phase gets a little expensive. So let's get it done.
Lisa?
Anyone from Parks? No? Councilmember Toll.
I agree. I think one phase, having it funded would be best case scenario. But if we can't do that and seeing what happens to projects as we stretch them out, I think it would be worth looking at things like a dry bathroom option and how much does that cut, and let's get it all done at once. I think it would be willing to look at those. It would be a good opportunity to look at those options. And the dry bathroom, actually, honestly, I mean, I grew up and still go camping, so I'm not opposed, but it makes sense with the project and the nature trail and all of that. But my only question is, if it was a dry bathroom, well, it was going to be up top anyway. When you said power washing sections of it, I'm thinking, how are we going to do that if there's no water hookup down there? There would be if there was a water fountain. So we would just need to make sure there was a way to access it for things like power washing.
I do believe that we'd probably have to look at bringing water in on some kind of vehicle for power washing. If they're talking about, because you're talking about the low water, which is down the trail a bit, correct? Is that where you're talking about power washing for trail maintenance?
Yeah.
So as mud and sludge kind of
Yeah.
flooding, because this is a floodplain area.
Another
Anthony's
option
little
could
vehicle
be,
might be able to put a tiny water tank on the back of that thing or something. Okay. That's the only thing I was thinking about was water hookups for that if we needed it. But yeah, I would be definitely in favor of one phase and hopefully it gets funded. But if not, maybe coming back to look at how we could make that happen.
and you can get water fountains that have kind of hose bib and a lockable kind of access door within that. So if there's a water fountain at that playground, you could, hook a hose up to it if you've got enough length to reach down there too. So.
Kath?
I agree that if we could get it, grant money, let's go for it. Also, in terms of the toilet, I'm also a camper, and I was at a porta potty in Parkville one day that had a little graphic that talked about the number of thousands of gallons of water that was saved just by this one little, not smelly place. So I think it would be in keeping, and this isn't a hill I'm going to die on at all. But I do think it's worth thinking about having a not unattractive, not stinky vault toilet or something of that nature to use, especially if it's a placeholder for a future improvement. If that would get everything else done in the beginning, I think we ought to really look into that.
Councilmember Graves.
I will die on the dry bathroom hill. I'm a Cub Scout leader, and something else I would that you touched on earlier that I really liked. You mentioned people from the community helping out, maintaining the park, maintaining the trails, things along those lines. One of the attributes of a Cub Scout is to be thrifty, and if you look at this budget here, forest restoration, $59,000, including removing the invasive species. Is that something that, before we even start with construction of the park, is that something that we, as a community, can engage people, even engage local Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts to go meet at the park and start removing honeysuckle in advance? And then my question to you also is, if you remove the honeysuckle, how do you keep it from coming back? This is a huge expense, $59,000. So, I mean, if we go down there and rip it out and it comes back the next year, I feel like is there a way to remove it and prevent it from reoccurring?
Yeah, I didn't mention when I reviewed that slide, it has an asterisk by it because really it's a volunteer option. I'm the president of the Roanoke Park Conservancy, and most of our volunteer efforts are focused on honeysuckle removal. So absolutely, that could be something done by Cub Scouts or other groups interested in town. To the second part of your question, cutting it once is not enough, unfortunately. So there's different modes of thinking about the best way to address it, but at least what we do in our volunteer efforts is a very small amount of Tordon in a little drip bottle that gets placed directly on the ring of that cut stem. And it does take, 2, 3, 4 years of kind of coming back and treating it. And the costs we have for contractors to do that kind of reflect that long-term commitment. But if you've got volunteers that are interested in doing that, it could absolutely be done with a volunteer effort. And the same for the nature trail. Maybe that's not a scout project, but there are groups in town like the Urban Trail Company and folks like that will, I'm not going to commit them to this project, but in other parks, they build those trails, they maintain those trails at no cost. And it's a great kind of service and amenity for those communities. So,
If I could add, you talked about, you asked a question about how prevent it from coming back. And the number one mistake, I think that, whether it's Parks and Recreation, whether it's Natural Resources Management, the number one mistake that people make is that they'll go in, they'll spend all of the, time and effort to get rid of the honeysuckle and then not replace it with anything. So there's a vacuum there. And I think everyone here has heard the phrase that nature abhors a vacuum. So basically the honeysuckle will come back when there's still a void to be filled there. It's very easy for it to do. So part of the restoration cost is identifying a native woodland mix that would be adapted to the area, that would come in and over the course of a few years be able to fill in that void. And once it's established and doing well, part of which could be, incorporated as part of a contractor cost, or, there are a number of different grants or whatever that you could go after to help fund that work as well. But it's filling that void is what's key to preventing the honeysuckle from coming back and having to re-spend all of that money every 5 years to go clear the thicket. And the woodland community provides those additional benefits of habitat and, sight lines and all of those other things.
thanks, Will.
All right.
Any other?
That was council. Anyone on park side? Well, there was a bunch of hands. I guess we answered all that. There we go. Oh,
Bridging the Gap is the local organization that your scouts could volunteer. They have a big push to remove honeysuckle from the bike trails at Swope Park. And it's a really fun activity to kind of let you kind of dip your toe in and see what it's really like. And they give you pizza afterwards.
yeah, I did that one time with in Swope Park with Bridging the Gap with Climate Action KC as well.
KC Wildlands is.
Yeah.
Go. KC Wildlands is the affiliated group with Bridging the Gap
There
that
we
has
go.
projects going citywide that put together volunteer groups, large, small, everything in the middle. So
perfect.
that's where I learned all about the blue, the blue stuff and
Yeah.
and how to apply it, and also the other ground cover plants that can flourish once it's gone. So
Yeah, Heartland Conservation Alliance is another organization doing similar things locally.
All right, so it sounds like I heard, oh, sorry.
Carol.
Go ahead.
We also have someone who loves parks in the Northland, Anita Gorman, who I'm sure would get involved and help us deal, and I know her. I mean, I would be happy to contact her. But I would think this would be something right
Yeah.
along her interests.
Thank you. Further comments on the first 2 bullet points here? All right, here you go. You want the last 2, or you want me to combine these into, what do you think,
Go for it.
in addition to what we've seen today, should be presented to the public when this goes back out to public?
I don't know the neighbors who live, like, from Anna's house to the corner where the parking lot would be, but maybe some sort of, like, three-dimensional looking back towards those houses, like what the tree line might look like, or just to show them that there's not going to be a spotlight on the parking lot on that corner. I don't know. I don't know those neighbors. I don't know if they're ones that need to be won over or reassured that this is going to be an okay plan.
Yeah, I can't find my map, but yeah, I was kind of thinking along some of the same lines, just different perspectives from different angles. I don't know, so some people have a better idea, especially this. It's labeled 1 here. If I'm a map here.
Anna?
There we go.
Anna.
Go ahead, Councilmember Palumbi. No, I think I saw Clark as well, right?
I called first.
There we go.
I had a few comments from those neighbors. The first one is we haven't talked about lighting. I think I brought that up at the last special meeting, but what we're going to do, I mean, are we going to have big pole lights that kind of go around the park? Are we planning to have those like motion activated or turned on and off during certain times of the day / night? And then my house borders where the sign would be. Essentially, it's kind of where the current sign also is. And we don't really have anything on here about how we're going to kind of deter parking in that area because it's a cul-de-sac that 26th Avenue is. And I just want to make sure that the people who are across from me, who would be directly where the path would essentially start, that their driveway doesn't get blocked off because there's no way for them to get out if it were to. So that those are the things I'm thinking about from the neighbor's point of view. And then noise also, because if that's where you enter, is there quiet hours? Is there a cutoff when you have to leave the park? All that stuff.
In terms of lighting, our current thinking is this is a sun up to sundown park. So we weren't including any pedestrian lighting along the trails. We do have some area lights on the parking, which could or could not be there. I think the thought is there would be a gate basically where it is now. We're going to keep that existing access road and access to the driveway and properties north of it. But we do have some area lights on that parking lot that would be, kind of high performance, very focused only on it with not a lot of light pollution or any light pollution on that. And like I said, we could or cannot include that lighting depending on what folks' thoughts were. We thought it might make sense to have something there, even if maybe people couldn't drive up there. There may be activity that people, bike or walk up there that would want to be lighting lit. But that's kind of what we're thinking there. In terms of parking on 26th Street, obviously we have no parking signs there. I'm thinking there would be probably a large sign as you drive off of Vernon 26, sort of saying, local residents only, even directing them to where they would park. Beyond that, I can't really think of much else we can do to deter that. And I don't know if that addressed all your questions or.
Yeah, and then I had 2 follow-up things, kind of related to the restroom or potential alternative options. That I think is going to be an important thing since it's so close to some of those houses. Because if it's not a decent smelling area, that's going to eventually irritate the people that live right there that have to smell a not well-kept restroom or lack thereof. And then my last thing was if that's going to be the entrance spot, I would request that we have leashes required for any animals that are going to go through there because that's been a problem in the past, specifically in Ward 4, that I would like to kind of address from the beginning because, I'm all for animals coming through there and coming through that lot, but if they're not leashed, that puts some of those little kids kind of at risk.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So Councilmember Clark next.
I think a lot was covered. I'm thinking back. Oh, yeah, the vantage points, obviously, yes, I'm for that. They're going to want to say, how is this going to affect me? I've had people say that live along those houses, say, well, what will I be looking at once it's built? And of course, we all know the big concern was, I don't want to look at big, bright plastic pieces, and we've dealt with that by putting it away in the hillside. But I think, yeah, that vantage point, although I don't know how you'll get a picture without sort of like lurking in their backyard to get that.
We'll let you take a picture then.
Yeah, exactly. A drone swooping down, but yeah, just kind of getting an idea, but I think we're already kind of accomplishing that by keeping the trees there and not doing like heavy, bright lights in that area, the pedestrian lighting, so I think that's pretty well accomplished.
Okay, I'm going to jump in before I get you two on one more here. The access path to the north. Have we discussed that with those neighbors at all?
I don't believe we have.
Because that would require quite a cut through their front yard and between those two houses there to get to that.
Not that we wouldn't need to discuss it with them, but there is
There's
a
city
right-of-way, city property.
Yeah,
over
yeah.
there.
No, I saw the city property, but I just also didn't want to go down and start just knocking down their fence.
Yeah.
Here's a sidewalk.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know who I saw first. Yeah, Smith and then Graves.
Kim mentioned not wanting staff to use the end of 26, and then kind of along with what Anna had mentioned, would it be feasible to put a fence across that that corner at the very end of 26 that bounds the park, and then have a gate that would be staff access only, so that people wouldn't think of that as an access point? It'd be pretty clearly marked that staff only, and the gate would have a lock that staff could open to get in and access to do maintenance to that area, and it would deter people. Because if you want to park to go to the park and that's gated off, like nobody's going to park on 26 and then walk all the way back around. I don't know what that additional cost would be.
Or if they don't want a fence earlier, I was wondering if maybe some landscaping that appears more, not as inviting.
Or
If you had a density of.
I mean, people are going to climb over rocks if it's there. Like,
Yeah.
If you put a fence there, people are not going to.
I didn't know if neighbors want a big fence over there. That's the only reason I was wondering if earlier you couldn't put a lot more.
More so than they wouldn't want people
just do some
parking
fence.
across
Yeah.
the driveway.
Like put a hedge, like a hedge.
It's something.
Kind of like a hedge, something a little more thorny though.
I would say that's definitely an option, something we could explore. We were thinking, if you lived north of the park and walked there, that's probably where you're going to walk into the park. So I would be a little hesitant for that reason, but I think even doing a fence or a hedge and a gate, that has a sign on it that, says if you parked on 26th Street, turn around and drive down there, you will be towed.
Neighborhood access only or something.
Maybe does further help deter that, so.
Good. All right, Councilmember Graves.
I was actually going to say the same thing. I was going to propose putting a fence there, but then the more I started thinking about it, I don't like the idea because it cuts off access for the people that actually live on 26th Avenue and people like on the, other side by the live over by the hospital. They're going to be walking to the park. I think that, but the no parking signs don't work. I mean, I live next to the high school, believe me, they don't work. So that's going to create an issue. And then regarding the mayor's question about the access, little trail, the little access trail, there's a really good example of that on 25th Avenue where you cut through to the skate park, to the,
that's right.
or to the wheel park. There's a little trail and it doesn't seem to bother the people on either side and they have a nice little fence there. And just a suggestion, Gentry, for example, when the high school built the new parking lot, there was a vinyl fence put up in between, their backyard and the parking lot as a kind of a buffer.
Yeah.
So you could always kind of keep that in your back pocket if you do have somebody that's objecting to the park, perhaps offer to, provide them with some fencing along their property. That's all.
I'm a frequent user of that little connection piece. All right, further comments? All right, so what I've heard in the first two, it sounds like one phase. Right, is this what you were hearing here, Kim? Is this? Okay. What else do you guys need? One phase? Do you have everything you need for the next public engagement aspect here?
I think we heard providing some views showing what things would look like from the neighbors. And I think unless there's any other thoughts on additional information that would want to be included. I think we got some direction in terms of exploring that kind of dry restroom to save some money, and got pretty clear consensus on we can get some outside funding, let's do it all, so.
Perfect. All right, well, in addition to what they said earlier, you've done a fantastic job, I think, of really building in and taking the community support, or community comments.
Thank you.
Yes. What else? Kim, you got anything else?
No, I think that we have what we need. Did you want to announce what the date was, Lance, for the next open house?
Yeah, the final open house for the feasibility study is September 14th. And I think we have that starting at 4:30 again, same location, trying to kind of follow the pattern of the first two open houses. So hope to see you there, so.
All right, anything else from council or Parks Board? All right, seeing none, I appreciate you all taking the time again to meet this evening and keep working on this park. With that, you've got adjournment.
If there's no further discussion, we will adjourn this meeting. All in favor?
No, no, you can't. There we go, you gotta hit the gavel. There we go, now we're done. Thank you.
You didn't bring that movie voice this time.